guys, welcome to Food for the Soul presents Intimate Conversations with Talitha Kume, and I am Talitha Kume. And you guys, I am so sorry we are a little behind, but bear with us. We're going to get this conversation going. So you guys, do me a favor, make sure you go like our page on Facebook, and I am Talitha Kume and Food for the Soul presents, and follow me on Instagram at I am Talitha Kume, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Intimate Conversations, you guys. And we are live here on FB, coming from the Renewing Faith Church here in Red Oak, brought to you by none other than Kieone Young Photography. Today, I am joined by some very special guests, and we're going to be talking about race relations in the church. And so, welcome you guys to My Skin is Black panel discussion. Our first question is, because we're discussing My Skin is Black, we want to talk about race relations between the white and black church. So we're going to start there. Why do you feel that there are still white churches, black churches, or different cultures churches? And why is there such a racial divide where we can't seem to fellowship together?
He handed me the mic, so I guess I think that we are making progress, but I think the challenge is a lot of the cultural differences. Okay. I think something that they do here in Dallas is very unique is I think they have a Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, that pastors of predominantly black churches and pastors of predominantly white churches swap pulpits on a Sunday, preaching each other's congregations. And so I think that's something unique that's happening here that's not happening in any other part of the country from as far as I know. But I think that a lot of it stems back to some of the differences and understanding the differences and being able to have conversations about them. That kind of gets to some of the things that we experienced, inherited, that were passed down from generation, right? So some of us, obviously, in this day and time, we were not slaves, but there were people in our history, generations past that were. And so some of that generational trauma has traveled down. And so we experience some of those, the ripple effects of that trauma today. And being able to explain the trauma to someone who does not have that experience, having the setting to have the conversation and have it received is, I think, where the growth happens. And there's not enough of the conversation happening. But we can talk about it, say, hey, look, this is my experience. This is where my pain is, and then have someone be able to listen to it and try to understand, seek to understand, instead of seeking to be understood.
Well, when you're talking about, let's just talk about the evangelical community. When people use the word evangelical, they're almost always meaning white evangelical. Okay. But if you look at the evangelical community without making racial distinctions, there's a lot of commonality in theology. There's also a lot of diversity. But on most of the major doctrines, there's quite a bit of agreement. But when it comes to politics or public policy, there's a tremendous divide. 85-90% of the African American electorate voted for Hillary Clinton in the last election, whereas over 80% of the white evangelical vote went to Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. That's a huge difference, and I think a lot of it has to do with an incredibly different social experience. Mm-hmm. I'm from Canada. I grew up in a very different kind of environment, and so I obviously do not have a black face, mm-hmm. but I don't have a typically white perspective either, and I've always been trying to figure this out, because when I was young, my theological hero and my Christian hero was Martin Luther King. And I remember coming down to Southern Seminary in 1975, and I'm talking to this guy, and he's saying, "Man, I want to preach. I want to preach so bad I can taste it." I know, he's from Alabama or someplace. And he said, "Who's your favorite preacher?" That was sort of a game back then. I said, "Martin Luther King." He kind of looked at me and his jaw dropped. He said, "Wasn't he a communist?" And so that was the kind of world I'd stepped into. So I've been trying to figure this out ever since. And I think the election of Donald Trump has really clarified this. Not in any way that I wanted to see. I knew from doing my work with Friends of Justice over the years, and we almost all of the trials that we worked with, whether it was in Tulia or the Gina 6 case, which is a case that we brought to light. There was a case in southern Louisiana where a mother and 3 of her sons were accused of being major drug dealers that we were able to take apart. And right now, the case I've been working on for 10 years, the Curtis Flowers case in Winona, Mississippi. All of these are small towns. And when you get in the courtroom in a case where the defendant is black and the jury is white and almost everybody at the front of the room is white, you really get a feel for the racial dynamics. I should have seen Trump coming because I guess I was assuming that these little towns are kind of unusual. But what I discovered was that the same kind of dynamics that I was seeing in those courtrooms was playing out in the election. And that's the thing we really have to deal with. Because I think theologically, a lot of the values are similar, but when it comes to public policy and political issues, there's a complete divide.
So if they're saying that it's mainly the issues that we kind of struggle with and the dynamic of being who we are culturally. So a white culture doesn't really understand black culture doesn't understand white culture, and that's the reason why we can't seem to worship together.
I don't necessarily believe that we can't worship together, but I think the situation rests that the different cultures is kind of like an underlying fact. I think we live in a society that does not want a God, does not love God. But when you look at the church, you have Caucasian churches, you got African American churches. Until the both of us can look at every situation through a biblical lens, then the divide is going to still be there.
Yeah.
And it's of course they can't understand, the Caucasian male or whatnot can't understand what I've been through, because I don't believe it's just in small parts and small cities, because I've been in Detroit, I've been in Virginia, I've been in Mississippi, I've been in the service, so I've seen all types of people, and you got some that play with you, talk with you, and then they get together and talk about you, and then you got some that just, like Texas, for instance, they'll tell you they don't like it to your face. So the issue is, until we can all get on the same page where it's put the shoe on the other foot, so to speak, do as to others as you would want them to do unto you, that type thing, like some of the stuff I see on social media with Caucasian police officers manhandling older women, and I look like, would you want anybody to do your grandmother like that or your mother like that? See, until we can get on that type of mindset where if you don't want anything like that done to you, don't do it to anybody else. All that, I really believe that it's still a lot of underlying hate. I mean, real hate. I think hate is still being taught, and so the church is nothing that the church can do but continue to teach what the Bible says and what God said, and that's love and those type things. But it's hard to do in 2019, 2020 when you continuously get stepped on, you continuously get abused.
Well, I absolutely think that, like you said, the conversation has to be had. We're forgetting that the kingdom that is set up in our faith, our belief, is a kingdom that unites us.
Right.
And there's a lot of pain associated with the divide. Pain on this side and misunderstanding on this side. And until we come together and have that conversation and we understand each other, then we will worship from the flesh and not from the spirit.
Okay.
Wow. Jesus wants us to worship as a united front. We're not black, we're not white, we're just his children.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
I think that's the problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get that.
And two, as my brother said, that's what Jesus came for. He didn't come just for the Jews. He came for the Greeks and the Jews, that we would be united as one, as a whole body in Christ. The Bible speaks about, if the head say to the arm, I don't need you, then how can it work? All parts of the body are needed. So whether it be black or white, we are needed together as one unit, as one body of Christ.
Right.
And my brother, said about misunderstandings, let me take it to a worldly situation. If I'm a drug addict and you're not, then how can you understand where I'm coming from? How can you understand why I'm hurting the way I am that led me to the drugs? But if we sit down and talk to one another, communication is the key to everything. Absolutely. So if we sit down and we talk and get to understand each other, then I believe we can work better together.
So, second question is, you guys, do you believe that Christians should be involved in politics? Now, Dr. Bean was talking about that, where there, and why is there such a stigma with the Republican Party and white Christians versus black Christians? Because I know for myself, being brought up, and I know that I've heard this so many times just recently, that we were told we're Democrats. Like, okay, you're a Democrat. Okay, I guess that's what I'm going to be. And so then when I turn 18, what you vote Democrat, right? I'm like, I guess I'm voting Democrat. That's what they told me. Right. And so, right. But so what is the difference? Why are we so divided in the church when it comes to those parties? And should we even be involved in politics anyway? Should we, as the church, or should we stand alone as the church?
So I think that's, first of all, that's an incredible question. I think I'll start with that the church is an influencer in the world, generally. So I think that's our approach, even when it comes to politics, because politics is something that is a reality. I mean, way back in Bible times, God told them that if you keep asking me for a king, here's how the king is going to treat you. Right. If you want, instead of me being the governing influence, if you want a man to be the governing influence, then here's what you want. Right. Here's what you're going to get. Right. And a lot of what you see, in that instance, the way that the Bible illustrates it, you see today. So I think that as the body of Christ, we are influencers. I mean, we can't help but have conversations about it, because the dynamics of how people are cared for, there's policy tied to it. I think Dr. B mentioned that earlier. And so we have to be aware, but continue to approach it from a biblical standpoint, in terms of how do we live out God's will for our lives in the earth, and orient policy based on that, right? So, for instance, what you do unto the least of these, you do also unto me. How you take care of the poor will always be among you, but how you take care of the poor reflects on your relationship with me. Right, so I think that even from a policy standpoint, as a believer, we have to continue to push and share and influence how policy is created, so that it will reflect the heart of God. Okay, right, and I think that's kind of our. So I do think do we involve ourselves in politics? I think so, but I think we do it from that standpoint, always to emulate the heart of God. Right, make sure that. Because as we're sharing the message of God with believers and non-believers, right? Our whole goal is that God's will gets done, that His heart is reflected in everything that we do, and that people are encouraged to, the sanctification process, to look like Jesus. That people are encouraged to look more like Him, to see things how He does, and to have a heart like He does. And I think that that's what our influence is. But I think it's unavoidable, because politics, it's not just the governing of the country, but there are politics in churches, there are politics on your job, right? So I think it's unavoidable, but I think there's a way as a believer that we do it.
And Dr. Bean, before you answer, I'm going to add some stuff in there, because Chris brought up a good point. So if we are trying to change laws or affect change according to the biblical principles that we know that we're doing, right? What do you say then to the candidates that may have 8 out of 12 or 8 out of 15, and you're like, okay, so this candidate believes in helping the poor, I'm with that. This candidate believes in doing, okay, I'm with that. But this candidate believes in that, I don't know. So how do you combat that? How do you?
Well, I think President Obama, he's still my president. Yesterday he was going after some of the younger folks.
Okay.
And he was talking about being too woke to affect real change. He said you got to be strategic.
It was too woke.
He says there are a lot of people doing good stuff out there who are flawed.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, they're not perfect. But you've got to work with them, and you've got to find some kind of middle ground, or you'll never get anywhere. And politics is that way. My wife has run for Texas State House in Arlington, and well, her gerrymandered district goes all the way up to the Wise County line, starting in Arlington. But she's run twice, and now my daughter is running in the same in the same district. So I cannot claim to be neutral. One thing I'll say though that's interesting, because in working in my wife's campaign and now in my daughter's campaign, we have a lot of contact with the Democratic Party. And I really notice a major divide over religion. Because if you talk to a lot of white Democrats, they really got it in for religion, particularly evangelicals. I mean, they just, white evangelicals of the Jerry Falwell Jr. variety, just mystify them. They find them repulsive, and you can see that on Facebook. Whereas when I talk to most of my African American and Latino Democrats, they tend to be quite spiritual. A lot of them are church members, and they campaign in the churches. Most of the Latino folks are strong Roman Catholics or Pentecostals, and they take their faith very seriously. And so for them, they do a lot more of this swaying back and forth. And I think the Democratic Party, being a big tent party, has that major problem where you cannot function in the Democratic Party without getting along with people who are very different from you. I think there's a lot more homogeneity on the Republican side. Unfortunately, that is so true that it's becoming a white party. And that's something that's not sustainable for them. They'll have to address that going down the road. But right now, it's a major problem.
Politics. I'm not big on religion. I've been in the Baptist church my entire life. And when we started this church, it's non-denominational. I'm not big on religion at all. I'm big on teaching relationship with Jesus Christ. Because religion just does what you can do it with your eyes closed, if you ask me, from Sunday to Sunday. But politics, I do not talk, and it's just me personally, I do not talk politics in the church. I believe that when you allow politics and government issues to enter into the church, you almost no longer have a free pulpit. Because the influence is there. When you start talking to your people about voting and who to vote for and those type things, that's an influence on the pulpit. And then it'll just be a matter of time before government or politics will tell you what you can and can't preach.
It's true. But what I think could happen is the church, the pulpit mentors a lot of young people that can go into politics with the virtues of God in them.
Yes.
I think churches can do more in encouraging young people, get involved, because You all know that righteousness exalts a nation, sin is a reproach. So if there's no standard for righteousness in politics, or there are no children of God in politics, then how can we complain about politics? You know, so
Sure.
that's what I feel.
Just like my brother was saying about the influence, if we are going to be in politics or have anything to do with politics, we need to be, the church needs to be the influencer
Right.
and not them influencing us.
Absolutely.
Because I've seen so many churches where pastors start inviting the mayor and the governors into the church, and then the next thing you know, because of the money, now the preachers are preaching the way they want them to preach instead of preaching the unadulterated gospel.
Exactly.
So if we are going to have anything to do with politics, we need to be the influencing force.
Absolutely.
And so I want to address this to a couple of people now. Just a couple of you answered. Should Christians participate in the Black Lives Matter movement? Do you think we as believers should participate in the Black Lives Matters movement? I'm going to go with Pastor Diaris and I think I'm going to go with Tolu. The question was, should Christians participate in the Black Lives Matter movement? Do you feel like we should be out there holding up signs with everybody else?
That is a good question.
I know it is.
I think that the believer should be a part of all lives matter. I don't, black lives, white lives, and now, I hate to say it, but blue lives, because for some reason they believe that God created black, white, and blue. So, but all lives matter. But I think as a community, I think we still have to be involved in these type things. If we want any kind of change, because initially everything we've talked about, even what we just talked about, as far as politics and those type things, until the church, the ecclesia, not the black church, the white church, but until the church gets on the same page, nothing is going. Black lives is not going. It's not going to matter.
Okay.
Politics is not going to matter. Nothing is going to matter until what God intended the church to be becomes what it is, what it's supposed to be, and not separate in certain things. Because we actually had a discussion about that. How is it that we were all created by the same God? We say we believe in the same God, the black church and the white church. So why do we have different opinions when these types of things happen? If we all looking at it, like I said, through a Bible lens, through a biblical lens, and we know what God wants from us, what He requires from us, and how He wants us to love one another, then why would we have a different opinion? My opinion gonna be, well, that was wrong. There's no way that should have happened. And then the other opinion is gonna be, well, he should have did this. Nah, it's not a should have did. I mean, don't give me something. But I think even as a believer, we still have to be a part of those type of movements just to try and get change until the church comes on one accord where we all can get together and say Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, and all life matters.
I totally agree. There's this scripture that says that we are in the world, but we're not of it. And for me, what that translates to me is that our ways are not of the world. And until we understand that we're in the world means we have to participate in the things that happen in the world, but our ways that we bring to it are the ways of God, are the ways of the kingdom. So if I've heard many preachers say, leave your thing at the door, don't, and stuff, but, but people, we as people, if we want change, then the church can be too quiet.
Right.
We have to bring the ideals of the gospel as a unified front, whether black or white, to these issues. And my final thing to say is, while protesting or while trying to get your views out, are you doing it from a perspective that reflects God's love, or that reflects I'm right and you're wrong?
Studies have shown that there is a wide gap between white Christians and Christians of color on the issue of police violence against Black Americans. About 71% of white evangelical Protestants believe recent killings of Black men by police are isolated incidents, according to a study published by the Public Religion Research Institute in 2018. About 63% of white Catholics and 59% of white mainline Protestants agree. On the other hand, 84% of Black Protestants say that recent killings of African American men by police are a part of a broader pattern of how police treat African Americans. Also, in some statistics that we also found that 93% of Black men murdered are murdered by other Black men. Question. So we saw what happened to Kirk Franklin situation. With, you know, he got involved in the double wars, and now he's boycotting and saying, hey, I'm just trying to shed some light on some killings in my community, and y'all just gonna edit it out like it, like I didn't even say it, you know. So my question is, should we as a church get involved in police brutality when there's things going on like Boston John, like Adesina, is her last name Jefferson? Adesina Jefferson. So things like that. Should we as the church get involved? And if we should get involved, why do we only see the Black church involved in high-profile police brutality issues, but not Black on Black crime? If 93% of Black men are murdered by other Black men, why is it that the church is going to get involved and rally when it's a police officer, the blue, that shoots an unarmed person or whatever, even though whether it was an accident or not, and we have every single day Black people killing Black people, and we're not marching for that. We're not raising the roof. We're not doing that. We're not outraged about that. We're none of that. What should we do? I'm going to go with Chris, and then I'm going to go with Dr. Beaton.
First and foremost, Black on Black crime is, I think, a way to divide, in my opinion, because we don't talk about white on white crime, or Hispanic on Hispanic crime, or Native American on Native American crime. I mean, by sheer numbers, there's more white on white crime than there is Black on Black crime.
Of course.
But we talk about Black on Black crime as an issue as if it's a solitary issue. Crime is crime. The challenge that I think we have as it relates to Black on Black crime, and then I'm going to work my way into how we address it as a church, is trauma, is generations of hating themselves, hating the color of their skin because the atmosphere has been tainted with it, right? I mean, you have things like the doll test, where the little children were given a Black doll and a white doll, and they asked them how they felt about it and what that made them feel. And they always had negative adjectives to use about how the Black doll made them feel versus the white doll. And it's, from a narrative standpoint, from an atmospheric standpoint, you're working through that so that you have the traumas that have ripple effects. And I think the ripple effects is what we see when we have people killing people who look like them. Now, that's just specific to I'm just still speaking specifically about Black on Black crime. I realize that there are different dynamics, but as we all know, we live in a fallen world, so it's going to be what it's going to be. But specifically as it relates to that, I think that there's a lot of trauma that is a contributing factor to it. Now, in terms of the church, and now, what was your original question about the church? I want to make sure I'm
was if we should get involved,
Right.
with police brutality and all that, and if we do get involved, why are we just getting involved with that and not getting involved with the total crime
Right.
that we see in our Black communities?
Right. So I'm gonna come at this from a perspective as a son of a former police officer. So my mother was a police officer, my father was in the military for a number of years. So I got to see it from a different angle. Most of my life, I wanted to be a police officer. All I saw was, police officers, and I saw white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and they were all cool. Well, obviously, you know, my parents' friends were police officers, and so that's all I saw, and I thought they were great. I was completely oblivious to some of those challenges in those days, and so as it has progressed, I think that the police departments have been populated by people who came to it with a fear of people who were different and a lack of understanding of the cultural context. And I'll give you an illustration. So in the African American context, we joke and we call it playing the dozens or jawing or you know. And so when we joke with each other, if you are an objective onlooker, you might think that they are at odds with each other, but they're really not. Right. It's just what we do for fun. Or African Americans, typically in our culture, we can get loud with each other and call each other crazy names, but it's just what we do. It's part of our cultural context. But if you're an objective onlooker and you're not familiar with that cultural context, you might think that there is a problem here, right? Because it looks like it on the surface. Because typically when somebody's disagreeing with somebody with passion, it looks like that. But we're just playing. It's just a joke. Or we do things, you know, we call it like slap boxing, right? It's just something we do, but it looks like y'all fighting if I don't know your cultural context. So I'm going to engage as if it is what I believe it to be without the cultural education. So I think that there are a number of individuals who are coming from rural context into maybe an urban setting, and you have no understanding of some of those different nuances, because maybe in your rural context, that's not how people do things. Or if you come from a different city or state, I think we talked about some of the places that we're originally from before we arrived in Texas. And in some of these different places, the cultural context is different. And so I think that from a church standpoint, I think we should get involved, again, because we're influencers in terms of the will of God in the earth. So that's our main goal. And our goal is that everything looks like God wants it to look. And so as it relates to speaking truth to power, we do. I do think that there are churches who are trying to do what they can do to address quote unquote black on black crime. But the challenge that we have when when there's a Caucasian person, a European American person who is in a position of power and influence, a police officer whose job it is to protect and to serve, who's paid by taxpayer dollars, that when there seems to be an imbalance in terms of how I engage someone who has a similar skin complexion as me versus someone who has a different skin complexion, that's where we get into some of the issues and the challenges and why we approach it the way we do. Also because in our country, the majority culture was oppressive to people of color. So again, the generational trauma, it impacts us differently because we don't see in our faces in media images of Caucasian or European Americans being brutalized by police officers. Even though by sheer numbers there are more. What we do see is continually flash in our faces. You know, oh, this person got shot. Not that there weren't white people that were getting shot by white police officers, because I'm sure that does happen. But it seems like because our population is smaller than we're the minority culture, that it's more, percentage-wise, it's more of us. Not only that, but we see instances, like we were even talking about from a criminal justice standpoint, how sentences for crack cocaine and powder cocaine were different, which predominantly impacted the African American or minority cultural community than it did the majority cultural community. And so those kinds of imbalances are reasons why the church has to get involved, because I don't think that you can, and I think I heard Dr. Charlie Tate say this once, that you cannot have righteousness without justice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you cannot have justice without righteousness.
Did you take everything you was
Sorry.
Everything I was gonna say, Dr. Bean, add your 2 cents.
No one ever takes everything I'm going to say. I think none of us have a problem talking. Well, again, I come at this partly from my Canadian background. My father had an aversion to guns. hated them, wouldn't have anything to do with them. The only experience I had with a gun when I was a kid was Bud Dunning up in Yellowknife, which is 1,000 miles north of Edmonton, which is 400 miles north of North Dakota, or Montana. Way up there in the Northwest Territories. We were driving across a lake because it was winter, and of course there was 20 feet of ice below us. And there was these ptarmigan, which are these white birds. They turn white in the winter, and they just blend into the snowbank. And Bud stopped his truck, and he got out this handgun, and he went up to these ptarmigan, and they're defenseless because they blend in so well. And he shot at them, and they didn't move. And he shot at him again. He kept missing, and I was just praying that he would not kill, because they're sort of like Bambi. They got these big eyes, and they were looking up at us. So those are the experiences that I had with guns when I was growing up. That's about it. And so I tend to share my father's view on the subject. But in Canada, gun control is very strict. You can have a gun for hunting. You can have a handgun, but you have to be very careful about where you carry it. You know, permitting is very much stricter. You can't get a gun without it being registered, and all of the things that we want to have in terms of legislation in the United States apply. I was thinking when I read about what happened to Tatiana Jefferson, 6 people have been gunned down by the Fort Worth Police Department, fatally, since June. I checked out the numbers for Great Britain, for actually the United Kingdom. 66 million people since June. 0 police shootings. Whereas we're in this town of maybe 500,000 and we've got 6. And so you see, and when you look at the rates of murder, the United States is so far ahead of other Western democracies. It's not, I mean, it's like 6-10 times as many, sometimes 20 times as many, depending on the country. And then when we look at the issue of mass shootings, this is not something that you see in any other country. So I think there is something, whether we're talking about black on black crime, white on white crime, when you look at that issue, you realize that it's not just black people who are killing other black people. Because there are lots of neighborhoods in the DFW area where you don't see black people shooting each other. It tends to be related to very, very specific. Look at Chicago, for instance. They've done studies on this. And it's particular neighborhoods, and it's particular parts of those neighborhoods, and it's very, very select individuals within those communities, many of which are psychopaths, and they're leading gangs, and they're killing each other, not for turf or over drugs or over women. It's just, it becomes a game, and a lot of guys get wrapped up in it, and they hate it, but they can't get out of it. And I think the same thing is true with our whole country. There is something very sick about America's obsession with guns and our willingness to use the gun. When a police officer, a white police officer, guns down an unarmed African-American person, it's usually because in the back of the mind they have this stereotype of the dangerous black person. And they get that from a lot of the black on black crime, and you can tell President Trump makes reference. He doesn't come right out and say you're killing each other, but when he made these comments about Baltimore recently, for instance, he was talking about black on black crime. He was talking about the murder rate in the inner city, and he's talked about Chicago in that way as well. But I don't think you can focus on any one of these aspects, whether it be the police shootings, or the black on black crime, or the murder rate in general, or these mass shootings, which tend to be done by young white males. It's all symptomatic of a deeper spiritual problem. And we got to learn to talk about it, and it's very difficult to talk about it without everybody hauling out their self-serving talking points. We got to get beyond that.
Definitely. But what I want to say is, it's almost, the African American church is almost like the Church of Israel now. We're almost at a point to where we've got a couple of options. We've reached the Red Sea. either we can go back to oppression, make America great again, I get it. or, you know, and that's just one of the options. Either go back to oppression, stand here and continue to just look at the situation, or move forward.
Come on, B.
Cross through that.
That's
Through that sea.
That's almost, that's about where we are right now. Or either we just continue to move forward. And when we get it, and the shame of it is, it's no more Martin Luther King, no more Malcolm X. So when we get to the Red Sea, it's no Moses standing there for us anymore. We don't have that person, you know, who was moving African Americans along. That it's, you know, so now we just at the Red Sea, it's just a people. You know, they can't come together because, like you said, you still have black on black crime going on. But I'm glad Chris and Dr. Bean hit on that. The fact that, we have black on black, we got white on white, we got Latino. But you do crime where you live.
That's right, with your people.
They just put us in the, you know, because they have the means to do so.
Okay.
So.
And so then my question then is, Reverend Barry, if you want to speak on it, then like I've been saying, that the narrative is being pushed that we are the faces on the screens. Whenever we watch a movie, whenever we see, whenever we watch, like I don't like to watch the news because I'm just like, oh my God, this is so depressing, I can't take it. And then now I have Facebook, so even though I don't watch the news, I'm on Facebook like, oh my God,
you still,
you know what I'm saying? So I'm still getting it, but so if the narrative is to push that we are the faces of everything wrong with America, then is there, you know, how do we combat that if we can combat it? And so when we're, and it's almost like, not like a teaching type of situation, because I was saying, oh, well, maybe they're trying to teach us because some of the young people don't really know. Like, no, they're just hashing up old feelings in us and then creating new feelings for these new kids that don't even know what happened. So now they're like, oh, they did that to us. Okay, we're going to march. And now they're making us angry. And that's all they're doing. And then we get angry and we feed right into what they want us to do, and then we end up doing whatever, and it's like it's just going in circles. It's going in circles. So like, what would you say that we can do as a church again to possibly combat some of that? For me, as a writer director, I told you guys that's what I do. The only thing I could think of was to start to tell stories that are different from what we are seeing.
like my brother Reverend Jackson said, we can either stand still and do nothing, or we can get together and move forward.
Okay.
And we have to move forward to stop this thing from keep rehashing itself, to go backwards, because if we don't, it's going to continue. And like Brother Chris said before we even got on camera, you know, it's a thing where, as a whole church, black, white, green, yellow, whatever, we have to come together as a unit and move forward. Because if we don't, we're going to be stuck, and we're going to die where we are. It has to be God-centered. It has to be, in order for us to even begin to heal, you know, and we have to let go of some of the stuff that happened, and not teach it to the ones that are coming up,
right?
You know, because I'll never forget, I was living in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and I was coming from signing up at the Union Hall for a job, and I'm walking past, and it's a bunch of black kids playing and a couple of white kids playing, and their parents were there. And just as I happened to pass by, the little white kids said, "Look at them nigger kids playing over there." I stopped, and I mean, I normally wouldn't be shocked, but these are kids, babies,
Exactly.
that this coming out of their mouths. And I'm looking at the mothers like, are you serious? And you're not going to say nothing? They didn't say a word.
That what we do now is seed for the future, right?
Exactly.
And I think that something that was demonstrated that caused a lot of uproar, I think in terms of what you're talking about, is when the judge hugged Amber Geiger.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a problem with that, because
Yes.
now she actually, I think chronologically, I think she hugged the family first. I think she hugged
Yeah, she did.
both of John's family first.
Right.
And then hugged Amber
Yeah,
Geiger.
right.
Uh,
And she only did that after the brother
Right.
hugged her.
Hugged her,
Right.
Because I believe she would not have hugged anybody
Right.
had he not shown that.
And so just being able to forgive a murderer
Yeah.
was an example
Yes.
to the next generation, like, okay, even when it's tough,
Yeah.
here's how you do it.
Yeah.
Even when my position is a position of authority, I can even show you how, in a position of authority, how to do this. Because see, Jesus didn't say forgive when it's convenient,
Oh, come on.
There you go.
right?
There you go.
Forgiveness when it's hard, and forgiveness is not parole. Forgiveness is pardon,
Come on now. Come on.
right? Because parole, you gotta earn it, so you see what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
pardon is completely
Yeah.
clean.
Yeah.
Now, as a believer, it's tough to forgive like he does, but it's literally what we're called to.
Amen.
Right.
That's it.
And I realize this. I struggle with just, man, wow, just the optics of this young man and just the whole story, the way it played out. But being able to be a believer and to emulate the heart of God, he said, listen, I forgave you
That's it.
of some stuff.
And
A
that's
lot of
it.
stuff.
That's it.
And all you had to do was ask me, and I washed it clean, and I never brought it back in your
Never.
face.
That's it.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, so when the Bible says, daily, pick up your cross daily
And follow.
and follow me. The cross is hard and heavy, right? Forgiveness is hard and heavy, but that's literally what we're called to.
Yeah.
And speaking that, and I have two more questions, but speaking that, then it should have been, and it was not, it should have been an opportunity for the churches, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever it was, to say, that young man right there displayed what we all believe to be true.
That's it.
Not anger, not, oh my God, he's hugging his oppressor and I can't believe he did that, and what's the time limit on whether he should. That was that young man's decision to do that, whether he did it for himself, whether he did it because God was like, hey, this bigger than you, like you said, it's bigger than you, so you got to go in there and show him. That was the time for all of us to rally together and say, see, this is what we talking about. This is what we talking about. This is why we do what we do.
Yeah.
But the churches was all like, some people was like, oh my God, it was such a great test of this. And then other churches was like, heck no, you know what I'm saying? And they didn't use that word. But they really were in an uproar like, come on, really? He just killed your brother and you finna hug this dude? And then they were talking about the lady rubbing the hair, and then we found out from the judge that the bailiff, when she was rubbing her hair, she was like, she was checking her hair. That's what the judge said. She said she wasn't rubbing her hair. She was checking her hair. Like,
Make
they
sure
check,
she-
right, to weapons and all kinds of stuff. She was checking. That's what she said.
I-
That's what she said.
I don't believe that.
That's what the judge said. Now, I don't know if the
I really
lady,
don't,
because I'm
because
trying to understand why the lady, why
she
would the
rubbed her
bailiff been
hair.
all like,
A couple of times, and she wasn't rubbing it like she was feeling for something.
Yeah.
She was like caressing her.
Like-
and
like-
then she turned around and went and got her some tissue. So I don't believe that. I don't.
maybe not, but I'm saying that's what the
Yeah.
judge said.
Yeah.
But,
Just real quick.
I know he over here steaming, waiting for it.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
I understand the dynamics of both sides. I do understand the brother, the judge.
Right.
I can understand how it was a perfect display of how believers should be.
Absolutely.
Now, the other side. Why is it? Because that was an example that we all saw. That was an example of Christian people loving on this lady for no matter what.
Right.
But the other side is out of all these court cases you done been in, all these times, if you got 80% of the black community populating the prisons and all of this, you have never seen a person that deserved that before? Because if I'm sitting in a courtroom and you about to give me a 90-year sentence or whatever, I tell you I want some Bible too. I tell you all kinds of stuff to get out of this. You understand what I'm saying? So that's where the problem came in. It's like, so this your first time seeing somebody remorseful? And you know what I'm saying? And you've been on the bench and you've been through all these court cases. This can't possibly be the first time you've seen this before.
But
Like
that's why
I think that a
yeah.
lot of people were saying, you know, what happens when one of our young men
Right.
does
Right,
something
right,
exactly.
that's far less
Right.
serious than killing somebody, and they get a lot more sentence, and nobody's up there hugging on them.
Yeah.
You know, I think that was a lot of the reaction.
But the thing is though, but typically what I saw though was that I truly believe that the brother opened up the door.
He did.
I do
Yes,
not
he did.
believe that that judge would have done that. So
Right.
I believe if Amber Geiger was a black cop and that brother said, can I hug him or can I hug her? Then the judge would have done the same exact thing because she saw the opportunity and she saw this man open up his heart and say, dang, he forget. Okay, all right. Well, let me hug the family. And then this lady's over here boo-hooing, crying like, what have I done? And then she goes over there to hug her. So I believe that I don't believe that. That's why she didn't do it before, because she ain't never seen it done before. That's what I think.
I've never seen a judge allow somebody to do that.
And
Right, I haven't
really,
either.
I think it was a time for God to be glorified.
Yeah.
God
There
was
you
just
go.
like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna step into this situation
Right.
right here.
Yes.
And he did.
Yes.
You know, and I felt like all believers should have seen that wasn't about nobody
No,
in that courtroom.
but no.
It was just about God.
And it was so powerful. And so to watch it, and I mean, I had tears like, this is the most powerful thing I think I've ever seen. And not because of the judge, but what she did. I'm talking about this brother who hugged this lady, who
Right.
said, I forgive you and God forgive you. And I'm like, what?
You had the same kind of reaction in the Mother Emanuel killing, where those folks
Yes.
forgave the killer. And a lot of people couldn't understand that. But it was powerful,
Yeah.
you know. And when Brad John asked if he can hug her, he was responding to Amber Geiger like she was a lost soul.
Right.
And he saw that in her eyes, and the judge was responding in the same way, and she was responding as if she was,
Yeah.
because she knew she was
Yeah.
at that moment. And so I really felt it was more of a saint-sinner dynamic
Yeah,
rather
versus
than
a-
a
Right.
white dynamic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree too. So I got 2 more questions and we're gonna get out of here. So this last question is, I'm hitting y'all because I really want to. I need some answers. So, we said I was thinking about something. Like, let me answer this. I got here. And so this is my second to last question. So it is, no, actually I have 3 more questions, but this last one is gonna sum everything up. But so, where does the church stand? Where do you believe the church should stand on the LGBTQ movement? Now, I was doing some research and talking to a friend of mine, and I did not know that the Black Lives Matter movement is also in support in conjunction with the LGBTQ movement, and I didn't know that until just recently. So they are kind of partnered together, right? Okay. And so the reason why I'm asking that is because with so many people coming to terms with what they feel their truth is, because we're hearing that nowadays. Everybody's like, I just got to live my truth. And this is my truth, and it's not your truth, it's my truth, and all this other kind of truth. And I don't know where we got that from, but so everybody's living their truth now, right? What role can we honestly play as believers, as the Bible clearly opposes the practice of homosexuality in any form?
Yeah.
It clearly opposes it, and we be trying to find Bible verses in there to say, no, it said, well, maybe, well, I think that, well, don't you think he was? But it clearly says a whole lot of things, but that part is in there for whatever reason we don't know, but it is magnified because now we see the movement going so strong and so heavy and so in the church, right? And so what I was saying was, I don't know if, I have something in my eye. I don't know if, I can't say that God has a sense of humor, but I'm just like, okay, God, let me holler at you now. I want to holler at him when I get up there, right? How is it that there are so many pastors who are struggling with homosexual children? Is that like not the weirdest thing? You're like, man, I'm getting up here preaching on it, but then I got my son or my daughter. So what do we do in those instances? Because they're coming in droves saying, let us be apart. We love God too. But I'm just trying to come to terms with my truth. And my truth is not like yours, but you're telling me that I'm going to hell because of my truth that I believe to be so. You know what I'm saying? Like how are you, Tolu? I see you shaking your head, so I'm gonna go with Tolu. And then if any of y'all want to jump in, because I know y'all sitting here shaking your heads like, I do not know. But I mean, like, what if any? What if anything can we even try to do?
I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
But I'll just say that the most important thing for a Christian is to exemplify God's love. And I think the reason why most people accept them in spite of them is because you gotta love them, because Jesus loves them.
Right.
You know, you can't say, get out of my church. You know, because you don't do things. It's kind of like saying, oh, someone killed somebody, get out of my church. You don't deserve repentance. You don't deserve love. So from my perspective, I wouldn't know what to do with someone that believes that this is their truth, even though the Bible is against it. You believe that some of them are going to say, I was born this way.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I was supposed to be female, but for some reason I came as a man.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't know how to argue with you. I think the only thing I would do is still show you God's love and let you know that this Bible that we both believe in is against what you're doing, but I'm going to love you still, you know, regardless of your truth. And I think that's the only place I can stand. And that's where I stand with all the people that I know that are gay. I just like, I understand what you're saying, but the Bible's against it, but it doesn't stop me from loving you.
Right.
Yeah.
And also I was going to say, and then we preach about no sin being greater than the next, right? And so you have your fornicators, adulterers, murderers, all that. We're all in the same place, in the same house, right? But because a lot of times, not all the time, but the homosexual community, sometimes it's, you can see it. It's visual sometimes, not all the time, but it's visual. So you see someone, if they're transgender or something like that, they're a man wanting to be a woman wanting to be a man, or what have you. When inviting them into the church, what positions do we take? Like what, you know, do you understand what I'm saying? Like for you to say, hey, well, I'm going to invite you in. I'm going to love on you just like I'm loving on that adulterer that's sitting right next to you.
That's right.
Just like I'm loving on that murderer or that murdered somebody that's right over there in the second row. I'm going to love you just the same, and I'm going to treat you just the same. Can we do that effectively?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a story. I go to Broadway Baptist Church in Fort Worth. There's a church called Wilshire Baptist Church in Dallas, which is very similar. This church was not talking about gay rights or homosexuality. I mean, it was just not something that was considered to be proper subject matter for church. This is back in the 80s. And this was when the AIDS crisis was really bad. And a lot of the people, especially the women in the church, started getting involved in ministering to AIDS patients. And then they started developing these drugs, which allowed them to live longer. Magic Johnson, for instance, is still with us. He's had AIDS for at least for a long time. So anyway, a lot of these men were really touched by the ministry. And so uninvited and unannounced, they just started showing up, you know, and they'd be sitting there in the congregation, and then there were 2, and then there were 4, and then there were 12, and then there were 25, and at that point, then it's something you have to think about. And so a few years later, there was sort of a don't ask, don't tell philosophy. And then somebody said, well, we think that our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters ought to be able to be pictured together in our pictorial directory. Well, they hit the fan, I can tell you. And we lost a whole lot of people. But even then, there was kind of this don't ask, don't tell, we're not going to talk about it situation. And it's been really difficult. But it is something that when you're sitting next to, like I was at a Sunday school party last weekend, and I've got this lesbian couple and they've got a baby, and I'm holding the baby, and so they can eat their dinner, and we're talking just like they're ordinary people, and then I've got a gay guy over on my right, and another gay couple over on the other side of the table. This Sunday school class is particularly open to the LGBTQ community, and it has, I think they've just decided to move ahead with that. Now, there is a Baptist ethicist named David Gushee who teaches in Atlanta, and he comes out of a very conservative Southern Baptist background, but he's written a book I think it's called Changing Our Minds, where he goes through the biblical texts and sort of re-examines them, and then also looks at the whole issue from the perspective of grace, and the big table theology. And so I think there is some rethinking of this issue theologically and biblically that is taking place slowly but surely. But it's difficult to have the conversation without talking about the subject, which has been considered to be inappropriate, and it tends to be very divisive, and everybody gets their back up, and the room gets real tense, and it's sort of like bringing up race in a white Sunday school class, which I've done. So that kind of stuff, I just want to throw that in there as an option. Now, there aren't very many churches, especially Baptist churches, that are moving in that direction, but it is happening in my church.
I was going to say, go ahead.
You guys threw the word gay out there quite a bit, and I'm sitting over, I don't even know if that's legal. Can y'all say that? I mean, I don't know, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
But I mean, nowadays you don't
It's in
know.
one of the letters.
Oh, okay, well.
LGBTQ, lesbian.
So you can't say them all?
Gay, bi, transgender, queer.
So
I mean,
almost
they're
half the
all,
alphabet now.
yeah, so it's that, yeah.
You know, but sin is like golden corral. It's a buffet. And we all done sat at the table before. But the problem when Paul was talking about in Romans chapter 1, when he named all these different things, which we all been, a part of some of this stuff, the whole thing about the making a kind of singling out the LGBTQ community or whatever in the text is because that particular sin goes against the very thing that God created.
Exactly.
Because he said, I created him male and a female. And that community actually puts some fist up, so to speak, and says, you are not my God, I'm my own God. I define who I am and what I want to be. Because the only thing that can call something what it is what created it. But for them to say that they can be whatever they want to be, then you're saying, you're not my God, I'm usurping his authority, I'm my own God, and I say what I am. And that's the problem with it. But for the church can only bring them in and teach them. Love on them and teach them. That's it. Outside of the church, you can't do anything to them when you go to jail.
Right.
You bring them in the church and you teach them. And that's what the church has to do.
I was going to say real quick, and I agree with 100% of what you guys have said. And I think really it boils down to a couple of things. The whole my truth versus the truth. I think in our culture today, well, the world in general, the truth is relative to me, how it fits me. Now, it might be different than yours, but this is mine, right? Versus this is his, and this is the only, right? So I think that's the thing that, from the church standpoint, that we got to kind of grapple with as well. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of just loving people because they sin differently, right? So whether you're a whoremonger, where you're sleeping, outside of the marriage with, a bunch of people of the opposite sex or someone of the same sex, it's sin, right? It's a sexual sin that impacts your body. It's the one sin that impacts your body.
That's right.
But I think, to your point, and I was going to actually touch on that, and I'm glad you said it, about how this particular thing, it really basically is saying, God, you got it wrong.
Yeah.
The Bible talks about how he knit you together in your mother's womb and made you who he wanted you to be.
That's right.
And there was a will that he had for your life and how he wanted you to engage. And you saying, you got it wrong.
You got it wrong.
Right? And the Bible even talks about what is the clay, who are you, clay, to say to the potter, you made me this way, right? You don't have that authority, right? So the way I approach it, I've had this conversation with some of my siblings and my friends, and we talk about it like this, and I come at it like this. The Bible, God said, be fruitful and multiply. Okay, so it is anatomically impossible for a man to multiply with another man.
It's not right.
It's anatomically impossible for a woman to multiply with another woman. I also find it interesting that, for a woman who wants to be with another woman, that she sometimes, in some scenarios, but a lot of scenarios, dresses like a man. What we define as a man, or how men typically operate.
What you got?
And then on the other side, the males who want to be with other males, one of them is more feminine in terms of their.
Yeah.
And I always think that's interesting. Like, okay, you don't want to be with that, but you want to look like that. I think that it's a slippery slope. When we look at it objectively, we see the enemy's influence.
Agenda.
Right? The whole goal is I need to just redefine. Again, you start when we even talk about the ways that relationships, the definition of roles and relationships, right? And how that is causing some challenges. It's breaking marriages apart because we can't figure out how this thing looks because who's earning the most money and how's it going to be, who gets to say how this thing goes and all that. And we're seeing the disintegration of our culture in terms of the way that God wanted it to be because of the influence of the enemy to reorganize what God has already set in motion. He said, here's how I want it to be. That's how I want it to look. And we're like, no, I think it'll work better this way. So anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
And that's true. That's true. I have two more questions, you guys. So this one, it has been spoken that the top 3 issues plaguing the Black community are fatherlessness, education, and the illiteracy rate, right? We know that for a long time, I think that it has been a plot to destroy the African American family structure, right? So, my question is, in their destroying, where are our men? Where are they? Where are our fathers? Where are they? Where have they gone? When whoever it was, the man and Satan, whoever you want to say it is, has caused the dissension between the family. Where do they go? Where are they?
All right, I'll jump in on this one real quick. So again, I think in a couple of my answers, I've been throwing out this word trauma because I think we have to address it. We have to address wounds and what the impact of the wounds are, right? The brokenness and what the impact of the brokenness is. And I think you and I have had this conversation more times than not, right? We're talking about just if you use a physical illustration, say you break your leg, right? If I look at you, I cannot expect you to walk the way you walk normally because there's brokenness in your life.
Absolutely.
So it's going to impact how you operate, right? So I can't expect you to jog or run because you have brokenness that impacts your ability to do that, right? And so when we start looking at it, when we back up and look at it from that perspective and look at the brokenness in the lives of men and the areas they have been broken, then it starts to make sense that what we see is what we see, right? Okay, so here's another thing. Okay, let's use the illustration of a broken leg. If you have 2 broken legs, I can't expect you to carry much weight on your back because you can barely carry the weight of your body on your legs, right? It makes sense that you can't carry the normal weight that a man who is able-bodied could carry. right? So for instance, if you're a father, then carry the weight of fatherhood. But if there's brokenness, you can't carry that weight properly without causing more harm to yourself, right? Because typically when you break a leg, they tell you stay off of it. You get crutches or some type of thing, so you let it heal with no weight, right? So I think the challenge oftentimes, and then too, again, going back to this trauma piece and looking at the childhood of African American men particularly, because there's some unique dynamics that are unique to black men. There's some things that challenge all men, but then there's some things culturally that I think are unique for black men. But I think it goes all the way back to this trauma and the narrative, what men are told, right? The generalization of some of the things that men have to navigate, and that's why I think we have to look at the trauma to address where the fathers have gone. If I ask you to be a man, but I don't tell you how to be a man, then you're left to try to figure it out, and you're going all kinds of places, right? That's why I don't really get the whole toxic masculinity thing.
Yeah.
When the majority of who a boy is exposed to is women, how can you be toxically masculine and you don't even know what masculine is? Now, your mom, because single parent homes, unfortunately, your teachers, your Sunday school teachers for that matter, right? Most of the people that you engage with as a boy is women. And they're telling you what kind of man they want you to be, not necessarily, and some of that is based on their own trauma.
Of course.
Right? Don't be like this instead of you see what I'm saying? So I think that, we have to go back and deal with those things. I think the root of the issue to repair the leg. So now you can support the weight of fatherhood, the weight of husbandry, the weight of being a leader in the church and in the community. And I think a lot of us are bleeding, and we're bleeding to death. And you're seeing the ripple effect. I can't, for instance, the fathers who love their children, and the baby's born, and they didn't grow up with, knowing how to care for a baby, right? Because that's not something we do. We're out, climbing trees and making dirt forts and stuff, right? Stuff that typical boys do most of the time. This is stereotypical, obviously, but children they're born. And so fathers are struggling to connect with babies. So then they're distanced because I love the child, I desire to connect, but I don't know how to do the things the baby needs. Mom knows how because there's a community around mom. I mean, if you process this, okay, when mom gets pregnant, there's a baby shower for mom, but nothing for dad, typically, right? When the baby is born, there's all this pomp and circumstance around the baby being born, and the attention is on mom, but not dad, right? So you have these dynamics where mom is celebrated, daddy's cast aside. Daddy's got 9 months of makeup time because mama's been bonding with baby.
We don't know what to do. But okay, and so here's the last question, you guys, because we're at about 9:25. And so my last question is, what do you believe is the church's purpose today? What should we be doing in the wake of a lot of things going on that the Bible speaks about that is going to happen in the last days? Chris brought it up before I got a chance to ask the question. Off camera. So the question is now, because we talked about it, and basically he said, we as believers know, if we believe the word of God, that things are going to get worse. And so my question is, I sit at home and I told you I was like all over the place because I'm like, what should I as a believer be doing? What should we be doing? Because I see a lot of churches that are preaching on prosperity and loving yourself and all these other kind of things, and those things are great, and overcoming brokenness and being healed. But in these last days, we're coming up against some spiritual giants, and I think we have no clue what to do because we're learning how to balance a checkbook at church. You know what I'm saying? I'm being really honest. We're learning how to do those things, but we're not learning how to fight that demon that's standing behind that man or in that woman. We're like, oh, okay, well, they're just evil. Yeah. No, it's demon. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's real, but like we're talking about it, and then it's like the media is putting all this out here in our face. But I think that they're making it so subtle that it seems like it's magic to like what's magic, of course. But it's like we're like, oh, it's magic. Oh, we got demons and vampires. So it's cool. But we're not realizing as believers, like that's demons, that's spiritual warfare. What are we doing?
Yeah.
And so my question is, and I want to go around the room, and I want you to be last.
Okay.
So I'm gonna start with Reverend Barry, and then we're gonna go around this way. So what do you think the church's purpose should be? Are there any things we should be addressing?
To teach that we are in a spiritual warfare, and spirits are real. You know, I was watching Sister Circle earlier today.
I love Sister Circle.
and you know, they were just bringing up these horror movies, and they mentioned Poltergeist, and how because they were messing with these spirits, that half the set got sick. Some of them even died.
That's true.
Yeah.
True story?
Yeah.
No lie.
Real. So we have to watch how we deal with spirits, because we are definitely in a spiritual battle, and we have to teach our church how to fight spiritually, because the physical is not going to win. We have to let them know that this thing is spiritual, and how do we fight spiritually? And right now, especially right now in this day and age, that's the church's purpose, is to teach the church how to fight, but spiritually.
And also, and I believe that, like I said, the media is making it make believe. So all of these children that are coming up, and even us adults, we don't know it's real. We think it's funny. We think it's fake. We think it's magic. Yes, absolutely.
And I also think that in as much as there's a fight happening between the church and the spirit realm, there's also a fight happening in the church, inside every believer. You know, Paul says that there's a war between the spirit and the flesh. The reason why the church is losing power is because the flesh is taking hold in the church. That's why when you're now faced with an actual adversity, you can't recognize it because you're so overtaken by the flesh. You know, so I think the church's purpose right now is to look back inward and ask yourself, have you dealt with what is supposed to be right inward before you can even go out to battle? Because an ill-equipped soldier is going to fail.
That's good.
Equipped soldier. It's a dead soldier.
Yeah, exactly. So I think pastors need to be more. You said something about the message being changed, and because we're taking our eyes on Christ and looking more into what is mainstream, what is flashy, or looking good. God wants you to look good. God wants you to have a Ferrari. Now we left the spirit battle behind, and we're in the flesh realm. And when the devil comes, the people that are weakest will fall. You know, so I think that's what the church's purpose needs to be.
That's it.
Absolutely.
When we talk about that spirit realm, we're on a whole nother thing. Most of the stuff that we even covered here tonight, basically all ties back into the church being unified. Black, white, Asian, Latin, whatever, all being unified, believing in the same God. But unfortunately, kind of about what you said, unfortunately, in churches today, in one particular church, you'll have believers that follow God by faith, and you'll have believers that follow God by flesh. So the battle starts in the church. So we're not even ready to deal with the spirit realm yet, because the church is at odds inside of the walls. You know, and that may be why we can't get out and fellowship with Dr. Bean. We can't get out and fellowship with the Caucasian church, is because we had a problem still inside of the black church. You know, with the fight that's inside of there, because you have so many, and we love to say it. I don't think we really take it seriously when we say it. When we say everybody in the church ain't saved, yeah, you're right. Everybody in the church ain't saved. But can we try to get them saved so we can try to fight the stuff we trying to fight outside the wall? But we having so much fun inside the wall
Exactly.
that we don't care what's going on.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. B.
Well, when I think about the end times, biblically, I think mostly about the book of Revelation. And I may be saying that just because my wife and I have been reading the book of Revelation for our morning reading. But everything for me centers in chapter 18, where we see the fall of Babylon. And if you were a Jew, or a Christian Jew, living in the first century when Revelation was written, Babylon would have been Rome. For us, I think we are Babylon. I think, and so the question is, in Revelation, the picture is that we are up against these beasts. We are up against the dragon, we're up against the beast, we're up against the red whore of Babylon, etc. All of these symbols of spiritual wickedness in high places. And so the question is, how is the church going to survive? And there's this portrait of the church as beleaguered and weak and fearful, and the dragon is chasing, pouring out its water and just about drowning the children of God, but they survive. And so there's this sense in which we can see ourselves, rather than trying to build these big, huge mega churches and make everybody feel good about their capitalism. I think that we really need to ask the question, all right, God, when the New Jerusalem comes down is up to you. All we can do is try to build the kingdom. And so we cannot determine macro events. All we can do is decide how we are going to respond as individuals and as discrete church families to this challenge. And I think we've got to get real about it. First of all, I think we have to realize that we are in a spiritual battle.
Absolutely.
Whether we're talking about the criminal justice system, or we're talking about guns, or we're talking about drugs, or we're talking about the dissolution of the family, we're talking about a spiritual warfare. And we've got to, I don't think we can afford, we don't have the luxury of giving up and saying, well, let's get fatalistic and just let everything go because it's all going to hell and there's nothing we can do about it. I think we have to be hopeful, realize that God is at work, and that even if everything falls apart, that may be part of God's plan. And so I think we have to realize that God is working no matter what happens, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, that was super good. So my comment, I guess I'm kind of piggybacking and maybe reiterating some things that you guys are saying. But I harken back to your father, Dr. Willie J. Bolden. Shout out to Willie J. Bolden Ministries. Who was my father in the ministry, my mentor, poured a whole lot. But one of the things, he has a heart for evangelism, always has. And one of the things that he impressed upon me and a couple of other guys that he really poured into was the sense of urgency. Right? So we talked about, and I used an illustration on Toledo's radio show about how he used to make us write papers a lot.
Wow.
But one of the first ones he had me write was, it really centered on this topic. What does the church do in this day and time? And basically it was centered around Hebrews chapter 6. And one of the things that I pulled out was, I think it was Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 24. It talks about how he says, you know, you will come and there will come a day when you'll come to me and say, Lord, Lord, didn't we cast out demons, do many miracles, do all this stuff in your name? He's gonna say, I never knew you.
That's it.
And I was like, it blew me away. Like, wait a minute, that sounds just like people in church. That sounds like what we do. And he didn't say you're going to act like you're doing miracles. He said you're going to do miracles in my name. And you're going to cast out demons in my name. Not like act like it, but you're going to actually do it. Because of the power of his name, not because of you. Right? But we're going to think because we're doing churchy stuff and stuff is happening in people's lives that it's really, but that's not what's happening. And our hearts are far from him, and we don't even know it because we're conditioned. We're conditioned by religion, right? Religiosity. And so Dr. Baldwin, her father, was saying, the reason why we offer the invitation every Sunday is because there are going to be people who it's going to happen where the Holy Spirit is going to grab a hold of them and help them to see, wait a minute, I've been coming to church all this time, and I didn't realize that even though I was participating in ministry, that the very heart of what God wants, I hadn't even given it to him. I haven't surrendered and allowed him to be Lord or ruler of my life, right? And so what Dr. Baldwin would always say is, man, he said, there's a sense of urgency. He said, listen, if you're driving along the highway and you see a car on someone's chest, are you going to continue driving or are you going to stop and try to administer some aid? You know, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to just drive by. I'm going to stop and see about him. He said, so imagine the spiritual weight of it. This is going to kill them. If you let that car sit on this person's chest for any long, it's going to kill them. He said that's what the sin is in the lives of people. He said so there's a sense of urgency, like don't just walk by, do something, right? So then it's a matter of what we call relational evangelism. You just striking a casual conversation with people. Hey man, how you doing? How's it going? Usually like, man, how's it going, man? Is it okay? Everything all right? Oh yeah, okay. And you have a conversation and then you find out. And the Bible talks about the fact that the Holy Spirit will give you the words that you need to speak. You need not worry about what to say. Just open the door. Have a conversation. You know, you don't necessarily have to be, you know, if I walk into the grocery store and I get my groceries, I didn't talk to nobody about Jesus feeling bad about yourself, right? You don't have to. But I think the Lord, you know, by the way of His Holy Spirit, nudges you. Like, hey, go talk to them, right? And that just be your, you know, you're not going to impact everybody in the whole store, the whole Walmart, but maybe just that person, right? And I think that what the church does today, I think we all kind of echo this thing. It's just love, the love of God through us. He takes care of the rest. You don't talk about the planting the seed. There's one that plants the seed, there's one that waters it, but the Lord gives the increase. So at the end of the day, like you said, God is going to do what He's going to do. But as the hands and feet, I think what we do is we love on people by engaging, by connecting, by not driving by with that car.
Sit on your chest like that.
Come on.
So does anybody have anything coming up before we end? Anything coming up? Tolu, do you have anything coming up?
Well, I have a single that's coming out soon.
A single that's coming out. Let us know. Get to the microphone so we
it's
can hear
called
what it is.
Need You.
It's called
Need You. I Need You.
Okay.
So it's a song about how much we need God. Sometimes, you know, you need to remind yourself that it's not all of you. You know, sometimes we just feel like I can do it, and leave God behind. And so that's what that song talks about. And it's featuring Crystal Aiken. She was the first winner of, you know her?
Sunday.
Exactly. And a friend of mine, Kiki Brooks, she goes to my church, she's a worship leader, so I'm excited about it. It's coming out soon.
And where can we find it?
It's going to be on iTunes and Spotify. It's dropping in a week's time.
Okay.
I'll share it on Facebook since we're all connected on Facebook now. So, you know, I'll have it.
Okay. Cool. And I'm going to need your information just so I can share them there. Anything coming up with renewing?
We all connected.
Renewing Faith Church. Anything going on with you, Pastor Biars?
No, except for we're about to go off into do a mentoring program at high school, at Reynolds High School. So, yeah, we trying to get outside the building.
You hear me? Mentoring program outside of the building at Red Oak High School. And then you guys, do you guys have a specific demographic here at your church, or do you just You know, are you?
No, our flyer says, come on, come out.
Okay.
We take,
Take him on.
make it.
I know. All people we ain't talking about. He said take him. He will take him.
You dress how you want to dress.
Okay, yeah.
And
It's a relaxed environment.
Yeah.
Just come and learn about the Lord. And I got a chance to come here last Sunday, I think it was, and I was helping Loud with the worship. And it was a short service, so he always, kind of tends to throw it out there, like, hey, we're only here for an hour. You can't give God an hour, whatever. But and those of you who want, a little bit more time, you might want to go to a different, But hey, I get it and I understand it and I don't mind it at all.
yeah, because me, my wife and myself, after we have service at least once a month, we try to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
At 11 o'clock, because we're done by, 11 o'clock or whatever, so we try to go somewhere else.
And that's why you can sure.
I get work.
I get it. After you pour into somebody, you want somebody to pour into. Anybody else got anything coming up?
Well, mostly what I got going is my daughter's election
Campaign, okay.
campaign, so that's taking up most of my time.
Okay, and I want to know more about that too, so I'm gonna put that on our page as well. Chris, anything? We're married.
There's a men's group that I started before I'm getting ready to relaunch called Lion Heart. So that's coming soon, so I'll probably get some more information. Once we all share it, I'll get you guys that.
All right.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get this young brother to be a part of Food for the Soul present. So we're having some conversation because he's been on my show a few times and we're just breaking it down like he does. There are so many men out here, and my husband, we talk all the time, he's like, there's so many things for women. Women, they got this, they got that, and men are sitting out here just like, I don't know what, they have nothing. They have no place where they can come to, you know what I'm saying? They just do, and we're not talking about those for real issues. Now, you might have men's groups where you come, you eat, fellowship, and that's cool, play some dominoes or something. Play some dominoes or something. Play some dominoes or something. You know what I'm saying? Sing a couple songs or something. But you're not talking about, and you're not dealing with these issues that these men are going through. So I really am trying to connect with him to kind of get some of that dialogue going on, so we can help some of these men as well as women. So you guys, we thank you guys for participating so much. And Food with the Soul presents Intimate Conversations with Talitha Kume. My skin is black. I have had an awesome time. I hope that you out there have been enlightened, and that this is some much needed conversation, and it will continue so we can have some active solutions in your churches, in your homes, and we can make a positive change all over the country, man. I was talking to my friend yesterday, and she was saying, why shouldn't our churches mirror what the world truly looks like? Why shouldn't it mirror what the world truly looks like? Why does it have to be a skin or a cultural issue, And so catch next time on our weekly radio show. Food for the Soul presents the Gumbo Mix Intimate Conversations next Thursday on Fishbowl Radio, the Blue Bowl at 9 o'clock p.m., you guys. And we are so happy you stayed here with us, and we will talk to you later.
Bye.